Welcome everyone to this talk on your favorite topic on regulations. We're not just going to talk about dry regulations from an EU perspective. We're actually going to share our insights into what we've seen with our customers. What are the main challenges implementing those regulations? Now, it could be that you're in the EU. It could be that your organization has EU citizens' data. It could be that you have an office somewhere in the EU. That might be just enough to be applicable to those regulations. So we're going to show you some of the key challenges that you might face implementing those regulations, and we'll also show you some opportunities that will allow you to use those regulations to, let's say, further increase your security maturity in your organization. So as a starting point here, we can't really look into the minds of the lawmakers that when they came up with these regulations, but we do know that some of the drivers of those regulations have been threats. Yeah, I mean, companies in Europe are facing the same cyber threats as companies everywhere else in the world. And so some of these threats have been a big driver for the regulations that we're going to be discussing. And the first one that I like to discuss, and I'm a numbers guy, so I would like to look at some of these numbers here. The first number is that dwell time. So the dwell time is basically the time between an adversary compromising us and us detecting it, the cybersecurity or the cyber defense team detecting it. And if you look at those numbers, most recent numbers are 10 days. Yeah, so that's 10 days between someone compromising you and then us detecting them. Now, obviously, that is not an acceptable number if you think about it. I mean, imagine that you're the CISO and one of your security members comes to you and says, "Hey, well, some bad news. We've been compromised, and you know what? They've been inside our environment for 10 days. I mean, it's not acceptable, but it is the reality, right? This is the amount of days that it typically takes adversaries to be undetected in your environment before you detect them. Although I will have to say, these are the numbers from the Mandiant Entrance Report 2024. The most recent report was actually released yesterday, and it's now up 11 days. So you can see the trend is downwards. For the first time in years, it's actually going up a bit towards 11. Because if you look at those numbers, we had 99 days in 2016. So why has this gone down so much? Well, before we start to beat our chest and say, well, it's because we have better tools, we have better trained people, we have more education and so on. Yes, this is a piece of the pie, but it's a very small piece of the pie. The biggest factor of this number going down is actually ransomware, because you cannot ignore ransomware for 10 days or 99 days. Well, you could. Technically you can, it's just not a good idea. But so it's interesting to see how ransomware has been the main driver there. So we're getting better at detecting these breaches, also because of what adversaries are doing with ransomware. But we also see that the speed in which a breach is occurring is definitely increasing too. Now, one reflection that I want to have on these numbers from real life experience is there's a lot of doomsday messages out there on making sure that we detect as soon as possible that when an adversary tries to deploy ransomware. A lot of organizations think they only have milliseconds when ransomware is being deployed, although we know for a fact that from experience, you on average have about 5 days before ransomware is actually deployed in an environment. So adversaries, when they have reached that initial compromise, they still need to orient a bit to see, what is the best way for us to deploy this ransomware? Are there any protection features in place? Do we know where the backups are, and so on? So there's typically some time, and it's that time that we really want to leverage as much as possible so that we can, kick them out, identify them and kick them out. Another thing to look at is the most common attack patterns. Yeah, so again, from another industry study. This is from the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. But here you can see that it has been quite stable over the years. What are the main attack patterns? System intrusion is still number one. These are like the typical vulnerabilities, that are happening, that adversaries are compromising to get in. But we also see social engineering being quite stable. And one of the main elements in that social engineering part is business email compromise. So it's basically those C-level impersonation that is happening, where CFO or allegedly the CFO sends an email to the accounting team to say, hey, I'm abroad, but I still want you to do this urgent transaction, yada yada. You know the drill. Well, it's those type of things that are still up there. What's very interesting though is have a look at the orange line, the miscellaneous errors. This is actually going up since 2023, and the reason for that is these are the user and admin errors, so people making mistakes. One of the reasons why this is going up is just because of the fact that we have so hugely complicated our technology landscape. Think about all the cloud instances that we have. Think about the new type of tools, posture management, vulnerability management. It's about how identities are being used in a cloud environment. So it's a lot of different things that can go wrong, which is influencing, again, the way that adversaries attack us. And as I mentioned before, business email compromise, really important element in as a starting point or as a trigger for those regulations, because of the fact that this is hurting our economies so much. Look at the most recent numbers, 2023, 2.9 billion related losses to our industry, to our economies, just because of that business email compromise. That's huge. And actually, if you look at those numbers, if you would go back to 2013 and calculate over the last 10 years, you would get up to $50 billion of impact to global world economy just because of this business email compromise. So that's a huge money drain from the economy that is not being used for productivity anymore. So that's something that has been a big driver for regulations to make sure that we need to protect our businesses much better than what we have done so far. And the last part that has been a part of, or has been a driver for those regulations, has been all those third-party type of attacks, the third-party risk that we currently have. Think about, you can build the biggest castle in the world with the biggest walls and the highest walls and the best protection system, but if one of your suppliers or one of your customers gets compromised and through a trusted link, they can compromise you, then all of those other protection features have been in vain. So we need to make sure that we can, one, treat those type of connections from third parties as, let's say, zero risk. So making sure, zero trust, I mean, so making sure that we don't trust those type of environments and connections. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we have procedures in place that if those suppliers or customers get compromised, that we can cut them off as quickly as possible. So that's going to be a key one. So just 3 elements that we want to highlight before we go into those regulations, maybe just as a recap. Threats are evolving. Traditional security controls are still the most effective ones. And you also see this in the regulations. They're not asking you to invest in the unicorn type of startups and perfect silver bullet solutions. They ask you to really focus on the traditional controls that are effective: patch management, backups, multi-factor authentication. Make sure that you are managing your cyber risk across the value chain, which means due diligence on your vendors, third-party risk management. We'll go into this a bit more in detail later on. And then the last part is be ready to respond. Yeah, so we're going to get compromised. It's going to happen. So just make sure that we're ready. And one of the things that will come back in the regulations are going to be those type of exercises, drills, incident response plans, making sure that we're prepared against those type of attacks. I'll hand it over to my colleague Pieter to give you some insights into the regulations.
Yes, thanks a lot, Maxim, for this intro. In order to build on that, in fact, you can indeed see some clear trends. On the one hand, indeed, critical sectors are subject to attacks. On the other hand, also more and more products, software are being exploited to craft supply chain attacks. And that's also a bit one of the attention points or those are two reasons, in fact, why we will focus on 3 regulations today. On the one hand, NIS2, the NIS2 Directive, and the other hand, the DORA Act, as well as the Cyber Resilience Act. The first two focus more on indeed protecting critical entities or critical sectors in the industry and the economy, in fact, to secure them. And the other ones, the third one, the Cyber Resilience Act, is more focused on ensuring product security. Now, as you can see, there's a lot more to tell about regulations in Europe. I think Europe is a champ in terms of regulation. It gives us opportunities and challenges, and also we'll comment on that later on. But if we maybe go ahead, we can start with the first one, the NIS2 Directive. So maybe just to set a bit the scene, first of all, I'll explain NIS2 Directive. So NIS2, as you can deduct from the name, you could consider it the bigger and the tougher sibling of NIS1. In fact, with NIS2, the ambition is set a bit higher in terms of cybersecurity controls and measures that organizations should implement, but also the scope has extensively expanded from 7 sectors originally to about affecting like 20,000 companies in the European Union, to really extend to 17 sectors and also 300,000 companies in the EU, or at least companies with a footprint in the EU. Because as long as if you fulfill the size requirements, and if you fulfill the activities that are maybe put you in the scope of one of these sectors in scope, you might be in scope of NIS2, even if your headquarters, for example, is established outside of the EU. Maybe if you go quickly to the next slide, there you can see indeed, like, visualize a bit the sectors in scope of the NIS2 Directive. On one hand, you have the high critical sectors, the blue ones, which were in scope already of the NIS1 Directive. On the other hand, you have a lot more added as part of the NIS2 Directive. Important considerations are also indeed like these sizing metrics, which are being used to determine whether you're an important or an essential company, because based on that, different rules might apply. If you now go briefly back to the previous slide still, then indeed we can also see that there are certain key obligations that are applicable to any organization in scope of NIS2. It's about implementing security measures in your whole organization, so both on IT and OT systems, because the processes for which you are in scope of NIS2 probably indeed relate to systems running on OT environments. Next to that, there's also a big attention point on securing the supply chain and ensuring that your supply chain can also fulfill your duties that you have to fulfill as part of NIS2. Next to that, there has also been a bit more a shift from preventive measures to also making sure that you are ready to respond to incidents, as Maxim also already pointed out earlier. And last important one is also indeed like strict incident reporting timelines and transparency on security incidents to ensure that there's information sharing within the EU. But those strict incident reporting timeframes are very demanding. Think of, for example, you need to have an early warning within 24 hours to the appropriate authorities. You need to be able to have a detailed report ready within 72 hours. You need to have a post-mortem within 30 days. So that's pretty demanding for a lot of organizations, especially if they are like, if they previously were not really regulated, like many of these industries now in scope. This is really, they need to really step up their game. A last important thing on NIS2 is the management oversight. Management is expected as part of NIS2, as part of the law, expected to be involved in making cybersecurity decisions. They need to be educated on cybersecurity risk. They need to be able to understand it. So that's also why it's a topic which lives at least in Europe already it's quite high on the agenda of a lot of the executive committees and board meetings. So again, that's also a reason, but it's also, it may also bring some opportunities which we'll discuss later. Now, if we move over to the next one, so the DORA, so the Digital Operational Resilience Act. So the DORA really focuses more on, it's if you would consider NIS2 to be focused on like critical sectors in general, DORA is really like more the fitted armor for the financial services industry. So even there, they've taken it a bit further, imposing even stricter requirements. DORA was entered into force in 2023, in fact, already, and really became applicable also as of January this year. And it's applicable to 20 different types of financial entities. So even a financial entity established outside of the EU, but having operations and activities in the EU will be in scope. So that's definitely an important attention point. Smaller entities would not be excluded because, for example, as you may remember from the NIS2 explanations, small entities there are excluded. They are not excluded in DORA. However, there's a more lightweight approach that they can choose to adopt. Obligations, in terms of obligations there, it's built, like DORA builds really on the same requirements as NIS2. However, it goes a bit deeper in certain pillars. Think of, for example, ICT risk management, digital operational resilience testing, which may be a bit of a confusing name, but in the end, the ultimate objective with that is to do red teaming, threat-informed red teaming, so threat-led penetration testing, to make sure also that you have adequate oversight and risk management of third parties. So again, you can see a reason why we highlighted that as a big threat as well in the initial intro, because it's appearing in a lot of these regulations. And again, also very strict incident reporting timelines. So for example, you need to be able to report incidents within 4 hours after classification, and at the latest within 24 hours after initial detection. So that's, again, it's very demanding in order to be able to fulfill those duties and to report timely to the appropriate authorities as well. In compliance with or miscompliance with DORA may lead to indeed to fines and sanctions. So again, it's also that's how they want to try to enforce this to the maximum possible. Maybe then, if we move on to the next one, the Cyber Resilience Act. So the first two really focus more on securing organizations in general. The Cyber Resilience Act, on the other hand, really focuses more on ensuring product security throughout design and also throughout maintenance. The Cyber Resilience Act entered into force recently in December 2024. However, all companies have still the opportunity to implement, or there's a grace period for compliance until December 2027. So there's still quite some time before you need to demonstrate compliance. Well, who's in scope of that? Manufacturers of products, digital elements that are sold in the European markets, as well as distributors and importers of such products. So even if you're not a manufacturer of a product, but you're distributing it or importing it, you are also in scope of the CRA. So that's a very important attention point. So indeed, it also applies to importers. It's not only applicable to EU-based manufacturers. And it's also important to note that the CRA has come up with a classification, default class, like different groups. Like you have the default classification, like you have the important class 1, class 2, and critical categorizations, which come with their different requirements. So that's also important to note. It's a bit risk-based also in that sense, that they want to apply, or that the idea is to apply measures or obligations based on the categorization. But in any case, some key obligations that apply to all. So on the one hand, products need to be secure by design and by default. Really important here is that you could consider it basically as if you buy a new car, you would also expect it to come with an airbag. So that's a bit the mindset of this regulation. That if you buy a software product or a hardware product with a digital component, that it's indeed secure by default and by design, and also that it's indeed ensured throughout the life cycle, including and during that maintenance periods. There's also, again, here strict incident and vulnerability management reporting timeframes. So 24 hours initial notification, 72 hours detailed notification, and 14 days and 1 month, depending on whether it's a vulnerability or an incident that you need to adhere to. So very demanding timeframes again here as well. And conformity will need to be demonstrated. It can range from self-attestations to CE declarations. To demonstrate that your product indeed complies with the CRA. Here as well, compliance will be enforced through fines and sanctions. Now, one thing that we definitely see with the CRA, but also with, for example, the AI Act, both were passed recently in 2024. Since Cyber Resilience Act to clearly act on those large scale supply chain attacks to ensure more product security. The Artificial Intelligence Act, for example, like a regulation that we haven't talked much about yet for the sake of time. Similarly, also again to respond to that AI threat. So here as well, and the implementations will need to happen from now until 2027 in both cases, but a lot is still not crystal clear on what's expected and if there will be any specific implementing acts that you need to adhere to. So that's also why it's important to keep track of that, to stay ahead of to monitor any publications in that space, so that you know, okay, what to always be aware if you're compliant or not compliant. And then if we move on to the conclusions on this section. So yeah, NIS2 clearly is stepping up indeed cyber game for critical infrastructure. You could say the same for DORA, specifically for the financial sector. So focus is there on indeed applying that minimum security measures, but also making sure that indeed there's resilience across the different sectors, focused on prevention, but also on responding to security incidents. It's also focused on making sure that the supply chain can adhere to that, and also indeed there's a big focus on transparency and information sharing, reporting of incidents. Another conclusion is new regulations must be digested. So a lot of these are now being published. We'll come to that as well in a minute. But for example, on NIS2, it's a directive. So all of the member states in the EU have to transpose this to local law, and even there, a lot of countries are currently still in draft, even though if the directive is already into force. So as you can distill from that, it creates a complex challenge to ensure compliance. Then compliance, and that's also it moves also on to the next conclusion. So comply today may not suffice tomorrow, depending on indeed further involvements in this field. So in fact, it's something which is continuously evolving. So yeah, organizations need a regulatory watch to ensure that they can keep up. Now, as you can probably guess from all the things that I've explained, there's definitely a lot of challenges that come from these regulations. But we want to be positive, and we want to also maybe raise some of the opportunities that we see based on working on these regulations with our clients. So maybe if you move on to the first one. So on NIS2, a couple of challenges that we see. So indeed, NIS2, it's a European directive to be transposed to local law. As I've mentioned before, it's something which is currently not yet the case in many of the European countries. So it's very unclear of what will be expected in each of the countries. As an opportunity there, we currently advise also companies who are multinationals, for example, active in multiple countries in the EU, that they maybe need to look at looking at security standards and certifications as a baseline, and then be able to map that back to the local requirements. So again, it's an opportunity to work more towards to more formalize security through existing standards and certifications. Another challenge is NIS2 implies indeed management responsibility and liability. And a lot of companies that we work with, management has historically never been really super involved in making the right cybersecurity risk decisions. I think even in Europe, even less than for example, in a lot of the US-based organizations. But because of, or thanks to NIS2, for example, cybersecurity has also become, because management bodies know that they are liable if if they don't take cybersecurity seriously. So it has also become one of the top agenda topics in all of the executive committees and boards. So again, it creates also a platform for cybersecurity teams to highlight the risks that they want to brief their executives on, and what they're currently doing about it, if they have the right amount of resources to fulfill that. So again, that's also definitely an opportunity in our opinion. And the next one is indeed that there's a strict incident reporting, incident reporting timeframes defined within the NIS2 directive. But again, that's also a driver or an opportunity for organizations to work on their detection and response capabilities, because it's a must, it's a regulatory requirement. So organizations need to be able to make sure that they can do that and fulfill that, and maybe test whether they can indeed meet those strict incident reporting timeframes. Another opportunity results from the fact that indeed the scope applies to the whole organization, as I've mentioned before, so including OT. So it's a momentum really for organizations to bring their OT security controls up to par with their IT security controls, and to work on centralization to implement maybe the same type of security controls on their OT systems as they have been doing historically more on their IT systems. So again, that's also some opportunity that we definitely see. Now, if we move on to DORA, one of the challenges that we see there, the DORA and the the RTS, so the regulatory technical standards, are very demanding. So they're very detailed, very particular in the way that the ESAs want to see that you fulfill those requirements. And important there is indeed that DORA also promotes the proportionality principle. So in fact, there's a room for you to decide risk-based how you will fulfill that compliance duty. If something would be totally not proportional for you, and if you can motivate that, I'm sure that you can also motivate that to the regulators then. Another opportunity or challenge is in the fact that indeed threat penetration testing is a requirement, but that also gives the opportunity to security teams to have a mandate to perform those extensive red teaming exercises on their most critical assets. Typically, there's always like a lot of pushback because these are like all of these critical systems are supporting their most important operations, and for that, the business teams and so on are usually pushing back a lot on organizing such exercises. But again, now it's a must. So that as a result of that, business teams also have to follow and accommodate this. Even here, and as mentioned before, incident reporting timeframes for DORA are even more strict than for NIS2. So here you could also say again, it's also again a momentum for companies or organizations to work on their detection, response capabilities to be able to fulfill that. And the last one, ICT third parties are in scope of DORA, but also of NIS2 in fact. So supply chain security is a big attention point, and as a result of that, it's also an opportunity for third parties, ICT third parties, to provide more trust to their customers. And in the end, the whole community, not only companies in scope of DORA, will benefit from that increased push for transparency and provide more assurance on what they are doing in terms of cybersecurity. Now, for CRA, some of the challenges that we see there, CRA indeed requires a significant effort on securing the product security lifecycle. So now security has really become, and that's an opportunity also, a hard functional and technical requirement for product teams. So it's not something that they can bypass or like think of security as one of the last things, or maybe only after that pen test that they did on the product. They really need to think of it from the start and make sure that they come up with products that are secure by design and by default. The next one is on indeed organizational security processes need to be extended to the product lifecycle. This really brings an opportunity to extend existing cybersecurity processes beyond the boundaries of the typical cybersecurity teams. So they will need to work with product teams, need to have representatives in those product teams, maybe, or security champs in those product teams to work along with them in order to be able to fulfill that, but by establishing, for example, also product security incident response teams. In case there's a vulnerability reported, the product teams can also closely work with the cybersecurity teams on fixing that. Scope affects all products with a digital component marketed in the EU. So as a result of that, products your organization will also have to raise the bar on indeed being more secure. So as a matter of fact, by this regulation, again, a lot more companies than only companies or a lot of the customers of these products will also be able to benefit from more secure products. And then the last one, product security needs to also be demonstratable. That's also definitely a challenge. A lot is still unclear there. There's definitely also a possibility or a business case, maybe even within your organization, to bring up the possibility to look into specific certifications to be able to demonstrate that. Now I give back the word to Maxim.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pieter. So Pieter gave you some insight into these regulations and some opportunities here. I also wanted to give you some insights into opportunities from a very practical perspective when it comes to detection and response. Because I really believe that this is one of the key elements if we want to comply with all of these regulations. It all boils down to be able to detect when an adversary is inside your environment as fast as possible so that you can start incident response. And incident response procedures involve also notification towards regulatory bodies. That's basically the principle of this. So I would say the first thing and the most important thing is really make sure that you can meet those regulatory detection and notification timelines. How do you do this? The most successful companies that I've seen that are able to do this successfully are the companies that focus on trying to detect post-compromise activities. Without going too technical, it basically means that instead of focusing on trying to detect all the ways that an adversary can compromise us, because there's so many ways, new vulnerabilities come out every single day, we're focusing on trying to detect an adversary that's already inside our environment as fast as possible, and then try to kick them out. That's basically what we want to do. So you want to streamline your incident response processes and procedures around that, so that people are not waiting on each other, that there's no tickets that are waiting to be assigned, that everyone knows what to do during a critical incident. The escalation matrices have been created and so on. So you don't want to waste any seconds of time during an incident response. The third element here is automate as much as possible. There's already not enough people in this industry, but if you're not automating anything, then this is going to be very hard to detect the right things and respond in a timely fashion. And then one of my favorite things to do is threat hunting. So it's about being proactive. Instead of being reactive and just waiting for an alert somewhere to pop up, what we want to do with threat hunting is we're going to be proactively hunting in our environment, trying to see, can we identify any of the adversarial activity that we might have missed because we didn't have any detections for it yet, and then try to cope with that. Now, I can guarantee you that if you start with any of those threat hunting processes, you will find things. Hopefully not too many active intrusions, but you will find artifacts of previous intrusions, you will find anomalies, you will find configuration mistakes and so on. But all these things are gold to identify up front, so you don't have to worry about that noise anymore during incident response. And then the last part is, there's a reason why we are doing drills, fire drills a lot. It's because of muscle memory. You want people to be able to know what to do during an incident response. So schedule those tabletop exercises, schedule those incident response drills as much as possible, so that people understand that there is a procedure for something, what that procedure is, and then have done this procedure before, so that they can basically that they know what to do and that it goes in a timely fashion. So as a bit of a wrap up here, use these regulations as an opportunity, because they will raise awareness towards the board already on, hey, we need to comply with those things. We're trying to scramble. They will help you get the right budget to drive certain things forward. So also use this momentum to think about holistically, not just IT, but also OT environment, maybe even other operational processes. How can we all bundle this together? Fast detection and response, as I already mentioned, so important that we can quickly detect as much as possible when adversaries are inside, and then of course have an adequate response and be as proactive as possible, right? So really make sure to be try to detect those threats inside your environment even before anything else triggers, so we're not just waiting again for that alert to trigger. Now, as a final thing for today, we wanted to give you some takeaways, and these 10 takeaways, you could really look at these as kind of a mental checklist. If you want to go through those regulations and see how do I cope with this internally. The first one is understanding whether, I think this is this is a given, understanding whether it is applicable to your organization or not. That is something you would need to consult with legal, probably consult maybe with your National Cybersecurity Center to see, is this something we need to comply with? If yes, try to already map out a roadmap. See what are those compliance requirements, with keeping in mind that it's typically about being able to detect and then notify a regulatory body of something that has happened as quickly as possible within those time limits. And this is also the time to then think about security, cybersecurity from a holistic perspective, cross-functional compliance, IT, OT, and products. Enhance your incident response capabilities, whether that is outsourced or in-house. Make sure that people know what they're doing, that they have the right tools, and that they're able to move forward on this. Think about your third-party risk management, so suppliers, customers, having procedures in place to cut off any connections if necessary, if those were to become malicious connections. And also think about cybersecurity talent and training. We We do have a lot of interesting courses at SANS that can help you and your people to get to the right level, but it's important to invest in this. And then as a last point, I would say establish some regulatory monitoring. So we now have given you an overview. I hope you liked it. Keep an eye on this. It doesn't necessarily need to be with legal, but it could also be by establishing a relationship with your National Cybersecurity Center. That would be my tip to keep up to date with these regulatory challenges. So thank you very much.